bit of energy in the room. It's like it's dead in here. So can everyone hop on like the Wi-Fi and get started? I'm just going to grab my laptop. You don't have to be quiet as well. Like just whenever like there's a point to make or whatever, if you quiet down. But feel free to talk and whatever. Right. So the first thing we want to do anyway is download this tool called Gamemaker. So this is a very nice basic tool for building 2D games. We chose it because it introduced a lot of different ideas and concepts like sprites and rooms and objects and so on. So I'll try and make that a bit bigger. But if you go to yoyogames.com/legacy, maybe I can get that up in a bigger text for everyone. So, dun. So if everyone wants to go to that URL and just download the relevant version, either Windows or for Mac, and anyone having an issue, we can just put up your hand and we can walk around and help out. So there's, while that's downloading as well, there's one other thing I want to get you to download as well. If you go to podorojo.com/pmpack, that's just like a zip file of all like assets and images we're going to use for today's tutorial. So what I'm going to show you today is how to make a basic replica of Pac-Man in this game engine, and hopefully that will teach you the basics. And then when you break into teams and decide exactly what concept you're going to work on within the theme, You'll have the basic understanding to go from there. Following up this event, I'm going to send out an email with a big list of resources, tutorials, sprites and assets and all sorts of things to really get started. So if you maybe, if something goes over your head today or you don't understand, don't worry, there's going to be a big resources email afterwards. Some of you will have worked, if you've had an interest in games development and you've been like messing around with games development before, you might have worked with a more advanced tool called Unity or something, which is completely fine. Again, this is just a nice one to start off with because it kind of caters to people who haven't done game development at all before. Basically, like walk around and make sure people are installing it. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Oh, brilliant. There's one here.
Right.
And this we can use.
How do you get back to the desktop on this? Or where is your pack?
Sorry?
Where is, so the USB key is plugged in, so.
Oh, sorry. Let's try not to that. I guess that's that. Nothing too.
Yeah, everything on that is actually fine. Please don't pack videos.
Cool, excellent. So we just need to download it from someone who's. Actually, I can just download it here.
You have a hard line.
Sorry?
So you have a hard line, so you should be able to download it.
Then I've got the copy of the pack on my desktop. Oh, that's quick internet. So throw that on here. Where did it go to? Is your USB key just disappeared on us?
It does look that way, yeah.
There we go. And then actually I can just throw the Mac version as a in the rare instance. There you go.
Right.
Right, so if anyone's having difficulty with the internet or whatever, we have like two USB sticks here, like sticking on it, so we can just walk around. it's always just frustrating when like another random like brings a machine. You're like, "Get that."
Or not a charger.
Yeah.
Halfway to the first hour.
Yeah. So this talks. Cool. Right.
Got 4 USB keys.
Yeah. So how many people? Okay. So people with laptops, hands up who are still waiting to like get installed or get set up. Cool. Okay. So a good amount of people. Okay. Cool. So is there people like anyone whose internet connection just isn't working? Okay. So we've got a few USB sticks that we'll like go around with. So like it's kind of like there's a few people here obviously that don't have laptops, which obviously like when you're trying to like do a tutorial around teaching a tool, that can be a bit boring for stuff. So we'll try and make it like as interesting and like non-laptop specific. Obviously, it would be really handy if you did have one. I think the rest of the day won't be so focused around having a laptop, just this particular session. So hang in for like the next hour, and I'll like walk through the tool and talk about the different concepts. So it won't be too boring. Fingers crossed. Right. It's only like 30 megs.
That's a 32 meg, yeah. So it may fit in that one, but it should fit in all the others.
It's cool. Right, so while we're still waiting for a few people to get installed and set up, I'm just gonna like give a kind of an introductory run through of what Gamemaker is, and then like go back and start like showing it step by step. So this is basically, sorry, I'll adjust this so it's easier to see. So this is basically Gamemaker. It's a really simple tool. On the left-hand side here, you see you've got different categories like sprites, sounds, backgrounds, objects, and rooms. In addition, you've got your game information and global settings, and these are all the different elements that make up that will make up our game. So, for example, like imagine if people are interested in game development, there's like many people that know what a sprite is, right? Yes, no? Do people know what sprites are? So yeah, they're like the images that make up, like they can be used for objects, characters, and so on. Sounds are pretty self-explanatory, backgrounds, pretty pictures, whatever. Objects are like the main interesting thing because they're like, an object can be your player, can be an enemy. It's something that's pre-programmed to do something. So in a really quick example, for example, if we were to throw together a little game that had, let's say, one level, so we'd right-click on rooms and go create room. So a room is like our level in this instance. That just creates a new room object here on the left-hand side. And we want to import a few images, for example. And don't worry, like for people who are installing here, and before we get set up, I'm going to come back and do this more slowly. But to give you a basic idea, so for example, if we went imported an image we named it Pac-Man. We loaded a sprite. I've distributed a assets pack as well, which has like all different Pac-Man faces and the ghosts and so on. Let me see here. So we can import an image, call it Pac-Man. Then we can import a background as well. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to do like most of these things. Like there's a similar pattern of just right-clicking and selecting and so on. So go into the same assets pack. Just pick out space PG, for example. So now that we have a sprite and we've got a background, we can create an object. Again, like an object is something we can program. This is where it gets a bit more interesting because on the right-hand side, we can see that we've got one category called events and then another category called actions. So for example, if I name this object player, I choose a starting sprite for it. So we use Pac-Man. And then we click Add Event. And these can be just like anything, something happens, we can program something to happen around that. So for example, when somebody presses down on a keyboard, so key press, let's say if they press right. So in here in Actions, we add in what we want to happen when that person presses right on the keyboard. And again, we've got more categories here on the left-hand side, but there's one action here is called Move, which again, one can imagine what that is. We can set a direction, set a speed, and then we want to, and then we click OK. So we've written it now so that when we press right, it will start moving in the right-hand side direction. Hit OK, and then finally just like open up our room or our level. We go into settings. We can set we can go to background, set a background for it. So click here, main BG, go into objects, and then we can just select an object from here, which is, for example, player, and we can just place it on our in our room. And then when you go to read that, we can see that we've got all these different elements have just come together within the last like few minutes. That we have our room with the background of the pre-selected space one. We have our object called Pac-Man here, and then when we press the right button, I click into it, we can see it starts moving to the right. Now obviously the reason that he's going to continue moving right for the rest of his life is because we never programmed him to stop once we took our finger off the right button. So one would easily fix that with going into player, adding event that when someone releases the right-hand side button, that they press, that they basically stop moving, which is they set a speed of 0 and like no direction. And that's like a very basic overview of like how you have sprites, again, all your images that you're going to use for like, could be an item, could be a player or whatever, the different events that you assign to objects, rooms, and backgrounds and so on. So I'll go through this in a bit more detail and slower if we can, and we'll just go around and check and see where people are in terms of installing and getting set up. So. Right. So it seems like there's a good number of people who are installed and up and running. So what we'll do is we'll start going through it step by step. If you're not fully installed yet, don't worry. There are people wandering around to help you out, and we'll bring you up to speed. We just want to keep things moving along nicely. So if we're going to start from the very start, because I kind of ran through things quite quickly there last time. So probably the most interesting thing with this is like a lot of these concepts they apply across like all sorts of every type of or every game development environment. So ideas like sprites and sounds and backgrounds and objects and rooms, they're not just for Gamemaker. If you go developing in Unity, you have to work with objects. If you work with most other 2D game engines, you have to work with sprites. So the skills and like when you learn Gamemaker and you learn a lot of the logic and theory behind it, that's actually applicable to all sorts of other game engines. So while like people start off and they might have like ideas of like creating like Call of Duty or whatever, and you know they try and make their first game and it comes out terrible and they get really disheartened. it's all stepping stones. So when you start off with working with kind of a 2D game engine, getting the basics of that, learning the logic of it, next step up is 3D, and it all kind of accumulates and gets better. And sorry, I'm stumbling over myself, so I'll just continue. So did everybody who got that installed get that assets pack as well with the Pac-Man images and stuff in it as well? Yes? No? Everyone's very quiet. It's making me scared, alarmed. Okay. On the premise that you do have that Pac-Man assets pack, the first thing we want to do is just import a bunch of different sprites. So again, we can name them in whatever. So I've created a few variants of Pac-Man. We have Pac-Man Up, which is so just Pac-Man facing up. So at this point, you'll probably start to see like how important it is to have somebody who's good, maybe handy with design on your team, and whether that's somebody who can like design from someone who can design straight off and create new characters, or whether it's somebody who can take existing images and change them to needs be, add transparency to the background. But you can see here, even just to get like Pac-Man to look right, we have like four different files: Pac-Man right, left, up, and down. And the whole idea is that when you change direction, you want Pac-Man to be facing the right direction. Now there are various different ways of doing it. Like if in some game engines allow you to, instead of like having to have 4 different variants of a file, you can just take the existing image of Pac-Man and like flip it or rotate it 180 degrees, and you can do it this way. And that way rather, in this particular case, we just have 4 images of Pac-Man. Sorry, that one didn't load properly. So let's say we've got our 4 different images of Pac-Mans. The next stage is to create our object. This is going to be our player object. This is the thing that we're going to control in the game. And again, just like last time, we create our player object. We choose our starting sprite, which is we'll go Pac-Man right. We'll add event. Again, we'll just do the basic. If they press right, they'll move right. One of the things with game development is you kind of have to think about a bunch of different situations. What happens if a person collides with the wall? What happens if they collide with an enemy player? If they go off the map, what happens? So again, I've added now to this player object I've created, I've added 4 different events, which is when you press the key left, and I've dragged over here the move object, which says it's going to move to the left at a speed of 5. Similarly as well, when they press right, same thing happens, but they're going to go to the right-hand side. When you release left, they're just going to stop moving, and when they release right, they're going to stop moving as well. Should just be the speed of 0. So the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to say that when they press left, because we know that the player is going to be moving in the left-hand side direction as well, we're going to change the sprite image. So we can go down here into main one, which is another bunch of actions that can happen, and drag over this sprite one. So we can just pick down from before Pac-Man left and have it apply to self. So in some instances, like if there was a collision with another, for example, if there's like a collision with an enemy player and you wanted to like show an explosion or blood or whatever on it, you could say that this action applies to the other object that they collide with. And then when we press right, they're going to change into Pac-Man right. So again, we just go back in here, add a background. So I included 2 ones in this pack. And again, all these files and a write-up of this will be like emailed out to everyone afterwards as well. Take space. and we create a room, which is just going to be our main room. So again, in settings, we can set the background for the room to space, add in our player object, save that, and run it. So again, we can see now that when we move to the right, when release, he stops moving. We move to the left, he changes direction as well, and keeps going. So this is pretty cool, but it's pretty lonely in there for him. So obviously you can start to think now how you would when you press the up button, maybe he might move up. What if you press like the up button, the right button at the same time, how you can get them to move at an angle. So let's say in the case of you wanted to like add an enemy in, and how you would deal with the logic of that. So you would create a sprite. We'll go maybe blue ghost is what we'll call. Load in a sprite with that. You can see I've got one here called blue ghost. Save that. And then we can create a object called enemy. It doesn't have to be always the case that you have for every single enemy you have to create a new object. Like you can create like one enemy object and just have that like duplicate like 100 times. So if you think about like if you were making a zombie game, instead of like making like 100 individual zombie objects and having them like programming them all to do whatever they do, you would just create one, and they would do it in such a way that it could be randomized the direction that they run or how they act or whatever. So we create anyway our object here called enemy. We load in our sprite called blue ghost. We add an event. So if we look at collision here, we can see that we can choose what happens when they have a collision with another object. So in this case, we have player. So in actions here, we can decide what we want to happen when they have a collision with the player. This could be everything from like the player moves back, the player maybe changes image, like there's methods here to go to like different rooms or whatever. And in this case, we can do something like display a message like you failed, or game over is probably more appropriate. And then we can just restart the game or something. So then we could go back into our room, simple as, choose our blue object, ghosts, and just place it wherever we want. For the crack, we could put another one over here. And then we see that when we run it, if we do happen to collide with a ghost, it restarts our game. And then from there you can build it out so that ghosts start moving. You can like build and score. There's a lot of stuff built into Gamemaker. You'll find with like a lot of game engines, they'll build in stuff like handling like score counting or keeping track. 3D game engine Unity deals with like a lot of UI or AI and lighting and other things. And then that's why, so when it comes down to like a games development studio choosing what engine they're going to use, they'll choose ones that have the most developed out for like what type of genre of game they're developing. So for example, the game engine used for like a first-person shooter versus a puzzle game are like two immensely different types of engines, because they have different requirements in terms of like the logic or if you think of like pre-programming enemies or whatever. So anyway, what I'm going to do now is just walk around and see if people start kind of adding in sprites and creating objects and creating rooms, and start kind of taking some progress off that. So I'll leave this player object open as well. People can see.
James, did you load up any of these? Do you remember which ones were loaded on? Or?
Okay, just throw it on again anyway. Doesn't matter. So just kind of, while some people are still hacking away on their games, just to kind of show you another aspect to it. So the kind of current thing that I've shown you and made up here is being again something very like basic that why is that still open? Sorry, one sec. So the basic example that I've made up here is just like Pac-Man is able to go back and forth. You know, he crashes into Blue Ghost, whatever, dies. So the next step would be like if you wanted to like start making walls or something like a maze for it to be difficult to navigate, you could do something like go into Sprites, create Sprites, load Sprite. I have one in here called wall, and just call that wall, and then go into objects, create object, and we'll just again be very creative and call it wall. Choose Sprite, and just add an event for a collision, and like we can make the kind of the wall multi-purpose. So the way that we so basically we say that anything that collides with it, we want it to kind of be bounced back or push back. So we can do something like we can go move. If they move, it applies to the to other or to a particular object. So I mean, it's probably easier if we just be more specific. So if we click on object, we can choose here that who it applies to. So let's say if player collides with wall, that the player will stop moving, which you would imagine would happen in real life. You wouldn't walk through a wall. If you can, that would be pretty interesting. So go OK, go into room, and we have our wall object selected there. And then we can just kind of start dropping walls. And then we can see that if we were to load up and try and move into said wall, okay, well obviously that's a bug then. Swish. So it's always the intense thing when everyone's like really eerily quiet and staring at you, and you're up here trying to like get things to work. It's even eerier that everyone was quiet at that. So, right. So they just like hit the wall, and you can tweak it so that they can't go like the full way through, but you can start like building out a maze around this. You can do stuff that if like the ghost collides with the wall, that they start traveling back in another direction and they hit that other wall, so they bounce back. So you can have stuff moving back and forth. So let me do one or two more tweaks on it while you keep on working on your stuff, and I'll show you in a sec. Yeah, I'm just about to show this. So, good. Right. Right. So I kind of like think that we're coming to the kind of end of this type of segment. So there's one or two things I just implemented, and I wanted to show you to kind of, I suppose, like leave with thinking. So it's really easy to get like how abstract and open all the actions and events are. Makes it really easy to build all sorts of like I suppose events and actions. For example, like I just kind of like added a few more things to it. For example, like with the enemy, I said that when they're created using the create event here, that they will start moving to the right hand side at a speed of 5 or at a speed of 2, and that when they hit the wall, that when they hit a wall, that they'll just like reverse direction. So one can like imagine that will make them like go from like side to side of a wall. Similarly as well, I created a fruit object as well that says that when they when they collide with a player, like when a player touches it, that it displays like a congratulations message and ends the game. But there's all these other methods as well of like going on to like next rooms, questions like health and all this. So it's really like kind of something you have to explore. So what mine kind of like looks like now is is just a basic maze. I could have added in more enemies, whatever. One enemy just kind of like going past. If I hit him by accident, it restarts the game. I can't get out of this box as well. So if it's going to show how terrible my hand-eye coordination is. Then up and just like get the fruit and happy days. So again, like that's something like really knocked together there in the last few minutes. And the biggest thing with it is that there's like so much potential and opportunity with it, is just to explore. And the crazy thing is like once you actually like build the first version of your game, that's kind of only really the start, because then you start to think, well, maybe like this part here is too narrow, so it's actually too difficult to squeeze through, or maybe this like needs to be a bit more open, or what if we like put 2 enemies here, and then you start thinking about like how people play your game, how they feel, and you start tweaking it. So really like doing the first version is just the beginning, and there's all these different aspects as well around art and sound and how you can really differentiate your game. I mean, like the whole idea of Pac-Man and trying to avoid enemies and so on has been done like, you know, thousands and thousands of times. So it's just like an easy one to show an example of. But again, like it's so open and so powerful that, you know, you could do any sort of style of game that you want. But anyway, that's the basic introduction to Gamemaker, a very easy, free tool to use to get started. Post this event anyway, from this I'll be sending out to those of you particularly that didn't have computers today, I'll be sending out a link with all like the resources, Sprites, like links to more guides on how to use this, in addition to like some more advanced tools if you feel comfortable trying them. But yeah, that was just a basic introduction to game development. So I think what are we moving on to next? You wanna? Switch over. Is there any questions around like Gamemaker or 2D kind of type of games or that, or like objects or anything? No, everybody is like knows 100% and everything about it. That's brilliant, excellent. I love when that happens. There you go.
Okay. There, I have a microphone. Okay, right. Not sure that popped up. So you can see from that tool, first of all, always handy when you get in this type of tutorial. You have a machine in front of you so you can follow along. What I would suggest, I suppose, is attending a local coder dojo. If you're unclear on any points, the video for this event will be up and linked to the website soon after we finish up here. But following on to a coder dojo, there will be mentors there. There'll be people there who will be able to help you out, allow you to bring your game beyond perhaps a Pac-Man clone to something of your own idea. So, just before I start talking about our next speaker, I'd like to, I suppose, say a couple of things about the event itself, the game that you guys are going to build. Games are not made generally nowadays by just one person, and especially for this event, we don't want you to be a single person making the game. So when you registered for the event, you ticked your preference, whether you're a coder or an artist or designer, or you're interested in marine studies, or whether you're a marketing person. So have a think about that, and have a think about the people who are sitting around the table in front of you at the moment. Most of you came in and sat down, and you might know people at the table. They might be from the same school or from the same county. And if that's the case, that's fantastic. Perhaps they are the best people for your team. Or perhaps they're not. Perhaps there are other people in this room who are more suited for the idea that you have, or for the game that you want to create. We will be creating teams at the end of today. It's kind of the last event that we're going to do, the last thing we're going to do. And I'd like you to have a think about, who do you need on your team? And when you get those people, the artist, the marketing person, the programmer, how are you going to communicate with each other? Obviously, if you all go to the same school, that's easier. probably see each other more regularly. If you aren't in the same school and you're in the same county, well then I'm sure there's a Coder Dojo you can attend. If you're not in the same county, it makes things more awkward. So think about what's the best way of communicating. There are some online tools. I mean, you can look at a very basic idea like email, or set up a Google Documents folder where you're sharing information. There are tools like PB Works, which will allow you to have a kind of an online collaboration of whatever project you're working on. Skype, Google Hangout. Have a think about all the tools that you can use and how you're going to communicate with your team members at the end of it, okay? I'm not saying only stick with people who are in your school or who are in your county. There's nothing wrong with working with people all around Ireland, but there are difficulties in getting, organisational difficulties in getting someone who lives in Donegal, someone who lives in Galway, and someone who lives in Cork, all communicating together and all working together. So it's something that you'll have to work at, and it's part of the challenge of this event. Okay, so have a think about that. You're going to go on lunch. I would almost suggest that when we come back from lunch that maybe don't sit at the same table. Maybe, and we saw from the games developer or the games maker talk, not everybody has laptops. Now that was the only interactive section, but maybe that's a good way of breaking up the room. Make sure that you're sitting at a table where every other person has a laptop, so that you're at different tables. You talk to different people, you're sitting with different people, and maybe you'll find suitable team members from that.